Welcome to Chasing a Murderer, guys. And before we get started, I wanted to ask you guys, if you don't mind, take a moment to subscribe, like, comment throughout this video. Let us know what you think. And if you really like to help us keep going, you can donate to our Patreon. So as you know, we are covering the Lori Vallow case. And this series is called Life Beyond the Grave, and we're on part 66. Things are really starting to heat up here, and the puzzle is starting to fit together. This is probably one of the most crazy cases I've ever covered, mostly because you're wondering how in the hell did it get this far. And trial is approaching really quickly, so we only have a few weeks, and Lori Vallow will be sitting in a courtroom, and finally we will see justice prevail. The families have waited long enough. Now, let's go ahead and get started because I'm trying to finish this series up and I'm having to skip quite a bit of information that I have collected for you guys. We are learning that Lori Vallow is listening to Julie Rowe quite often. She seems to be very moved and persuaded by Julie. And during this time, Julie, well, we're hearing that she's living in Kansas and possibly on some donated property that was donated to her organization. The rumors are that she was planning on developing this property and building a compound headquarters for the disaster preparer group. So preppers and her circle. So her organization is basically there to help in some of these emergencies that she listed, sometimes sex trafficking, sometimes end-day disasters. And this property is supposedly owned by the foundation. But even during this time, a witness says that they noticed that the foundation doesn't seem to have gotten off the ground. And she's pushing people to donate to this foundation quite often, especially in a lot of her podcasts. And I often wonder if Lori Vallow ever give to this foundation. She encourages people to stop pushing money to the church, but to her foundation so that they can help people when that time arrives. A lot of people claim that she was actually getting a salary from this foundation. But last we looked, she had only made around $5,000, but that didn't include the properties that we had, well, hearing that is donated to her. Julie Rowe's website, well, we noticed that it's up and down, and it seems to be based off of her mood and her ego. And people who are watching her just to see how things go, well, they're noticing that her webpage is blank, and they're concerned, is this something that's going to stay, or will we see a change in that later? Some speculate that maybe the domain expired and hadn't been renewed. But I can tell you, since I've been investigating this, she will take things down. The date that it was created was May 5th of 2016. It was updated May 5th of 2016, and then the expiration date was May 5th of 2017. So while her website's kind of off and on, her YouTube channel, well, she's sticking with it pretty good. Meanwhile, around this time, it's August of 2017, Preparing the People, they had their 14th. This audio program, well, it features Anthony Steffens, sorry guys, and talks about the role of John the Revelator. That role was his part in the end time. So again, preparing the people, pushing end-day fear. For those of you who are not familiar with John the Revelator, they say that he's holding the keys to the restoration of the house of Israel, speaking of Zion and the return of the 10 tribes. As for Chad Daybell, well, he's getting a little more chatty about his visions and his past visions that he hasn't shared so much. And he's blogging, and we've already gone over this, where he was a missionary in New Jersey, and he runs into this family and this guy by the name of Raphael that was very open about visions. And we know how Chad was absolutely amused by this. But something you needed to keep in mind is Chad said that he had visions too, but he didn't dare tell anyone. Back in Utah, especially, because they would think he was crazy. But you must understand that Chad, the reason why he believes that his religion and his church is true, his first visions was the angel Moroni, John the Baptist appearing, Peter, James, and John giving him the priesthood, And let's not forget that he's seen angels at the Kirtland Temple. And he mentions the fact that you'll hear the church talking about them, but this is a history. And he says they fail to mention that these historical events that they refer to, well, they need to start believing that these things still happen now. And that Chad's ability to determine dark or light spirits or good and evil, while those powers were growing. Chad Daybell has always had the interest in the supernatural. And during his time as a missionary in New Jersey, he said oftentimes that they would run into several people who complained about supernatural disturbances and that they would use their priesthood powers to cast out disruptive spirits. And even as a young man, he talked about the fact that he could understand that there were disembodied spirits, both angels and dark spirits. And what he understood about that during that time and now is the fact that he's thinking about these spirits or standing around them, listening to what they say. And he says, can that really hurt? He would see angels actually talking to these spirits. In between this, he writes a few more blogs where he refers to the end days and the 144,000. He quotes several of his prophet leaders in his religion, mostly quotes referring to Babylon, Zion, the end days, earthquakes, destruction, warnings of judgments of God that will be poured out upon the wicked, war against other nations on the U.S. soil, quoting how Joseph Smith mentioned that people will see more bloodshed than they ever seen before, including the wars that will bring families to pit against one another, father against son, brother against sister, which I felt was very important that he shared this because this is something you will see Lori Vallow do in the future. She will actually see her own family as enemies. And he speaks about how many of the leaders of the church have referred to atomic holocaust and how preparing shelters and being prepared would be very, very important. Now we know there's always a possibility that something can go wrong. I mean, anytime. But we're not having to deal with this every day. We're being scared to death with atomic war. If you think back, those of us from my time, when we were younger, we had scary times when we would hear the news talking about Russia using nukes on the United States. And that's a scary scenario. So if you can imagine the people that are believing these things that Chad and Julie are teaching, it must be incredibly scary because many of their visions show them gathering to these open spaces, sometimes in the mountains, sometimes in the country, and they're carrying their supplies, sharing these supplies with one another, seeking refuge. And they envision planting seeds, growing food, and living off each other's fruits and labor. A lot of times they're also envisioning surgical appliances, medicines, disinfectants, all in a storage held in high guard. And many of the leaders of the church preparing and planning maps, building secret corridors, and placing people in certain areas to do certain jobs. This is an attempt to bring back, functioning community to benefit their group. And what they use are the words, these people, they're drawing closer and closer together so that they become strong forces that can actually make it through these darker times. Chad will mention the fact that while these visions are not doctrine, they are of a divine origin. And people like Julie and Chad, they're teaching people that you need to be on board early in order to be successful when these darker days approach. If you are not prepared, well, most likely you're not going to be accepted into their group. Chad Daybell starts quoting some of what Joseph Smith said in 1833 where Joseph warned about bloodshed within the United States, starvation, war. The wicked generation is growing, and the wicked are taking over the lands. You can expect that these lost tribes will actually start coming back to return from the North Country. There's warning again that you will see men hunting the lives of their own sons, brother, murdering their brother, women killing their own daughters, and daughters seeking lives of other mothers. Then Chad quotes Elder Orson Pratt, who described anarchy that would sweep the nation. So Chad is going through the histories of quotes, doctrine, and trying to find the phrases that he thinks will fit the narrative he's looking to push. And who of all would be probably one of the most important characters from the Mormon religion that Chad uses is Moroni, three Nephites. And he says this is where they make their first appearance in the books that he writes is the Emma trilogy, which is named after his daughter Emma. And it's, I guess he puts it in 1868, where he writes about this disaster coming and how they have to escape and make it to Zion to survive. His interest in the three Nephites is the fact that these were the first of the 12 disciples of the Americas who chose to stay on the earth until the second coming. And then he quoted Nephi 28:25 through 26. Behold, I was about to write the names of those who were never taste death, but the Lord forbade. Therefore, I write them not. For they hid from the world. But behold, I have seen them, and they have ministered unto me. A lot of people are wondering, what does this mean? Well, it seems like that these are translated beings. So this is very, very important to notice that his interest in translated beings is quite early on in his life. One of the characters that he's mentioning as well is Methoni. So it's different than Moroni. And guys, if I don't pronounce them right, my apologies. The amount of information I've had to learn with this case, it's hard for me to catch on to all of it. Chad quoted, and this is something you need to understand so that you understand what people like Lori Vallow is reading and understanding. A man by the name of George Q. Cannon, and what he had to say about the New Jerusalem. He said, "We appreciate the home that God has given us here in Utah, which is so fruitful and in blessings to the saints. But we look forward to the land with indescribable feelings, because it is the place where God has said his city shall be built." And there are many leaders of the Mormon church that Chad continues to pull out quote after quote, one of them being Orson Pratt, who actually said or talked about the construction of the New Jerusalem. Suffice it to say, I lost my spot here, guys, that God, by revelation, will inspire his servants and will dictate to them the order of the buildings of that city, the number and width of the streets, the kind of homes, the character of the temple that is to be built therein, the kind of rock, timber, and the various materials that will have to be brought from a distance to enter the composition of this beautiful city. Orson Pratt often referred to what Joseph Smith described the future of the New Jerusalem and the temples that would be built. Joseph Smith had dreamt that the church was built to where it is today, where there would be tabernacles, where meeting houses were to be assembled for the people on the Sabbath day. And in Chad's blog, there is quote after quote, person after person, that he's taking these little references to, future beautiful cities that shall be established based off of God's direction, if you will. The place that they are speculating Jerusalem to be built is in the state of Missouri. And they expect to have loads of machinery. They expect to have manufactured storage houses, buildings, build mills, and they expect this to be an industrious, frugal, economical people. And importantly, their focus is supposed to be on the children. The children are there. They are supposed to be part of this because they say that they predict that they will build many, many, many schoolhouses. I think that's important to note when you understand what they're reading and what they're teaching later on. Because if you know this story, you know that the children involved with this case, well, these children are done away with, and a lot of people are kind of pushing the narrative in that circle that they were concerned about their well-being, and maybe they were preparing to not be on earth any longer, but that doesn't seem the case based off the research I've done. Chad Daybell refers to, again, two prophets, Elder Bruce R. McConkie of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, in a book that he wrote titled The Millennial Messiah. The word that comes from the Lord is, I will give power unto two witnesses, and they shall prophesy, and 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Who are these witnesses, and when shall they prophesy? In this book anyways, the prophets are kind of speculated to rise up from the Jewish nation in the last days, and that these Jews will actually be converted into Mormon. This will happen just before Armageddon, and they will return to the Lord Jesus. They will be members of the Church of the Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints. He then again refers back to the book of Revelation 11:2-12, where there's other things that he shares, but we don't have time to go through that. But I noticed that he mentions the fact there will be a given power unto two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in a sackcloth again. Most importantly, and if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. This is something Chad Daybell is highlighting, and I believe it to be important. And they of the people of kindreds, tongues, and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. And after 3 days and a half, the spirit of life from God entered unto them, and they stood on their feet. A great fear fell upon them, which they saw. And they heard a great voice from the heavens saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. So here he's referring to what sounds like translated beings. So through his books, through his blog, Chad seems to be very, very infatuated with becoming a higher power and leading many of the Mormons through this apocalypse. And he refers to the fact that Orson Pratt teaches that these men that are protected by God, they won't be touched by the plagues, the death, the power, the wars, not even starvation. He's very interested in being part of the gathering of the high priest with the keys of all dispensations in his hand. When I first started covering this story, we had no information, and so I had to dig and dig and dig, and I was able to put together a lot of it that I wasn't able to upload in time. And so I was a little disappointed in that. But guys, I know there's a lot of extra information here, but I feel like it's very, very important for you to understand the motive, the intentions, the manipulations, and the lies a little bit better. So during this time, when you have a lot of the LDS speakers going to the tabernacle, they're saying that the tabernacle is no longer owned by the church, at least in this timeline. And you have a lot of speakers coming up And one of them, guys, I know you need to understand Hector Salsa. He had a role to play in the circle during this time. And his preparing the people's speaking, he's quite quiet until they kind of start pulling him in. He's there to testify that he hasn't had a near-death experience. However, he insists that he has a spiritual gift of seeing visions of the future tribulations and preparing for the coming of Jesus Christ. But guess who is on this train? Julie Rowe is on this train, and she mentions that she too believes in the gathering and the formation of the 144,000. And while during this time, a lot of the speakers are more afraid to mention Joseph Smith's name, Julie Rowe is not so much afraid. She uses his name all the time. For a lot of people, they believe that Julie, well, she's disillusioned by her own mind. But there are a few that believe that she is seeing real events, prophecies, and these things are happening. These messages are being sent to her from the creator of this religion, himself. Melanie Gibb will appear at one of the events and actually be part of the conference November 18th of 2017. So remember, it's one of these meetings that Melanie Gibb says that she meets Chad Daybell for the first time. Now you know why. Because they're in this circle, they're doing this, preparing the people. Many of them are speaking on the topic of end days. Melanie Gibb admits that she finds his dreams interesting, like we said before. And here's the thing. Here's a post by Preparing a People, one of their podcasts. They said about this podcast, we feel blessed to film and document many gifted people who are prepared by God to play a very valuable role in the end times. Now remember, later on they will say that they really had no part to do with that they were just doing this to make money. This was their job. But that's not what they're saying. They use the word teach, and they say many of these people teach us powerful lessons through the high price they have paid. The inspiration that they have received, like the flood from heaven. From expos to conferences and outdoor retreats, we hope to the content we host expands wisdom and understanding beyond most of our blog helps. I think they mistyped that. Inform people on projects we are working on. And it shares spiritual insights that we gained along the way. So they admit this is some of the insights that they learned from. So what we learned, this series is about translated beings, 3 Nephites, and how preparing the people played a huge role in fueling these gifted people. So importantly, the 3 Nephites, they supposedly are converted Jews. Very interesting. And it seems that the translated beings get to walk on this earth forever. Many people attached to this circle, or what we call end day enthusiasts, believe that what they are learning from these conferences, well, they're 100% true. Many of them pushing the fact that many of us are gifted. We just got to bring out that gift. We got to believe in it and trust in the visions that we see. Become a translated being where you can ascend to heaven and hear about these unspeakable things. We are changed from a body of flesh to an immortal state. And as a translated being, you can meet in heaven and have conferences with God Himself. You have the keys to heaven. You have the angels by your side. How enticing is that? Your job as a translated being is to help run the heavenly business. So you'll help run the wars. You will help organize for the future. And most of all, your family and you will be safe. So again, imagine yourself as a believer and you hear all of these devastating things that are about to happen. Wouldn't you want to be there beside God and the angels as destruction rains down? There are many people out in the audience who are hearing this and they think to themselves, well, I guess we need to prepare. I guess we need to join in. We need to find our gifts and secure our family, our friends, and our loved ones. And those who are spreading these lies and manipulations, in my opinion, well, this is the way to do it, to gain followers in this community. So Julie Road, Chad Daybell, that's what they're doing. They're at these little speaking events, and they're suggesting, hey, you might have a gift, and you might be a translated being, just like us. And the church has warned since around 2015 about the church deceivers among them. And I believe the problem is they just have so many walking within their own walls of their church, their land. It's just a problem. And their adversaries are their best friends. They're their mothers, brothers, sisters, and cousins. And soon the rain's going to rain down serious consequences from these people. So you'll hear me actually refer to them as transfiguration, transfigured, translated. It all means basically the same thing. And in my research, guys, I just really cannot believe that they did not see the consequences that would come with what they were teaching, what they were pushing, and how many lives were going to be touched or destroyed by this. And the way that they see the translated or transfigured people is they see them as a better people. They're above everyone else, but that's not the way Jesus says it would be. It's people that walk with him. So they rise and fall with him. So they're saying, yeah, I'm transfigured. You can come with me. And Jesus will be here later. And what I noticed, they're very interested in being authority figures. But I think they misunderstand what authority, what the responsibilities are. They seem to think it's more of a worshiping center. It's supposed to be leadership for your benefit, meant to walk beside your fellow man. And it just seems to me that these people are trying to steal away the authority of the church, the authority of other leaders, and now the laying on of hands have been placed in the hands of deceit. We need to talk a little bit about demons and how demons, they are just spirits or just energies, and they desire to be flesh and bone. That is one of their biggest desires. And they were sent from the heavens to earth to roam as spirits without flesh forever and ever. That's an important thing you guys need to remember and keep at the back of your mind. And I realize I put out 67 ahead of 66, but just bear with me, guys. Thank you so much for your support. I do truly appreciate and love you guys, and I'll see you guys soon.